This is Abby Zerline. I'm Illinois DeafBlind Project's Family Engagement Coordinator. I'm going to introduce Megan Forrestal. She is the Public Affairs Specialist for Social Security. She covers 17 offices in Northern and North Central Illinois, and she's been working for Social Security for about 20 years. So, Megan, it's all yours.
Thanks so much for having me tonight, and thanks everyone for joining us. Yes, I'm based in Peru. If you're in the suburban area and you're not familiar with LaSalle, Peru, we're about 10-15 minutes from Starved Rock State Park, so a lot of people do know that as well. But I cover northern and north central Illinois, so chances are if you're watching this, you might be in my servicing area as public affairs specialist. And today we're just going to go through some information in regards to our disability programs that we have through Social Security. And as I mentioned, I can take questions at the end, but if you want to put them into the Q&A box as we go along so you don't forget them, please feel free to do that. Just to start off with our definition of disability, and this is for an adult. So this is anyone as soon as they turn 18. This is the medical definition we have for Social Security. We have two different programs we're going to talk about today, which are based on disability, two different types of programs. But the definition for anyone over the age of 18 for both of these programs is going to be the same as far as what the criteria on the medical side is. So with Social Security, we are looking at whether a person can perform substantial work, substantial gainful activity, or substantial gainful employment. And this is going to be a dollar figure every year. So our definition is specific to our agency. A lot of other agencies will have their own definition of disability. So if a person can perform substantial work, either something they've done in the past or just something that they could do in the economy, that's what they're looking at. And the other part is it a long-term condition? So is it something that's expected to last at least a year or result in death? So it doesn't already have to have a year past, but it's the expectation that it's a longer term disability or a terminal illness. So as I mentioned, that substantial gainful activity or substantial gainful employment is a dollar figure. And every time we have a cost of living, this is going to change. So if you're watching this, we're still in 2024 right now. We're in December of 2024. If you're watching it in a future year, then these figures will be different. But SSA.gov will always have the most recent figures available on our site. So in 2024, we're looking at that for that medical definition. Can the person work and make $1,550 gross a month? Now, if someone meets Social Security's criteria for blindness, it's $2,590. But they would be meeting our definition of blindness. And then we're going to use this, as I said, for the medical decision for both our different programs. The first program we're going to talk about today is Social Security disability. Now, Social Security disability is when someone has worked and paid into the Social Security program with FICA taxes. So this could be the person themselves, or some people might be receiving a Social Security benefit from a parent's record. So this could be up until age 18 or continuing on as what we call disabled adult child benefits off a parent's record after 18, but disabled prior to age 22. So either the person themselves has a work history into Social Security, or they're eligible off a parent who has a work history off of Social Security. Both based on a disability could get the person on a Social Security benefit. Social Security disability, we pay up until full retirement age. So once someone is past that point, we no longer take disability claims. And again, same medical definition we just talked about, though, as far as expecting to last at least a year or being something that's going to result in death, such as a terminal illness. For Social Security disability, two things also need to be met. Unless you're under certain criteria for blindness, then you only need to meet duration. But otherwise, you need to meet both a recent work and a duration or an overall amount of work test. So someone filing for retirement down the road, they only have to have enough total work, whereas with disability, it has recent work and enough total work. So sometimes people will have a gap in their earnings. Maybe they stayed home to raise children. Maybe they were caretaking for their parents, or maybe they were incarcerated and they have gaps in earnings that were not related to medical conditions. And that can mean they might meet enough overall work, but not enough recent work. Now, for someone younger, so that's what we're going to focus on right now, 24 or under, you only need about a year and a half of work during a 3-year period before becoming disabled. So we look and convert things to credits. So this would be 6 credits because you can get up to 4 credits a year, and you need 6 minimum to get any sort of Social Security disability benefit. And then the older you get, the more work you're going to need. But again, we're focusing on those younger amount today, just those 6 credits. So you will see sometimes people that are fairly young do have enough credits for Social Security disability. And then we also look into our other program, which is our needs-based program, Supplemental Security Income. And we call that SSI for short. So same definition of disability as we said for adults, anyone 18 or older. But we also have this program for children with disabilities, and anyone over age 65 no longer has to have a medical decision. They just have to meet the income and resource requirements. That's called an aged benefit. Whenever we're talking about SSI and these programs, and when I'm talking about the income and resources, I just like to make sure you know the things listed on this PowerPoint screens are just some of the types of income we look at, some of the types of resources we look at. When we're doing applications, we're going to go through pages of questions about different income sources, different assets you might have that we refer to them as resources. And we're also going to say at the end, is there anything else we haven't mentioned? Any other types of income we haven't mentioned? Any other assets we haven't mentioned? Maybe you have something more obscure that you didn't think to list, like a baseball card collection with value, or something else that we can't ever have everything worded into an application, or we would never get through. So we're going to trust you to let us know if there's anything else that we might not have mentioned. Now, the reason that this income columns are broken down into 2 different are because we count those types of income differently. So for earned income, both for the person and for something we call deeming, which we're going to talk about a little more, but deeming is we look at the income of any parent in the household when the child's under 18, or any spouse in the household when someone's over 18 and married. So earned income is going to be counted differently than unearned income. There's going to be higher tolerances for earned income than there are for unearned income. Now, earned income for the individual filing is anything over $65 gross a month. We're going to count half. If they have no other income, we first have a $20 exclusion. We apply that to unearned income first, and then the $65, and anything over that we count half. Now, for parents and spouses, there is a chart that we have. It's not something we place online just because it can be difficult to figure out. And so if you're not certain if you might be eligible for SSI, or if your child might be eligible for SSI, it's always better to contact Social Security and be screened for the program rather than miss out on potential benefits. Now, unearned income for the person filing, that's a little more straightforward. It's counted dollar for dollar, except for $20 is excluded. So common types of earned income, of course, we look at gross wages, we look at net earnings from self-employment, we look at payments from services in a sheltered workshop. Unearned income, just some of the more common ones would be unemployment, veterans benefits, Social Security, workers' comp, that's not on here, but that's a fairly common one. Interest, pensions, or even cash from family and friends. Resources, things that we do not count always, are a home in which someone lives in, even if it's a mansion, we don't count that as a resource as long as a person's living in it. The first car, which for this would be the highest valued vehicle that can be used for transportation. So if you're rolling through in a Rolls Royce, as long as you use that Rolls Royce to go to the grocery store, go to school, go to work, whatever it might be, we can exclude that as a vehicle, but it does have to be a vehicle that's used for transportation. So if you have a speedboat in the state of Illinois, you're probably not able to use that for transportation year round. So that wouldn't be something we can exclude. But anything else, we're going to take that first vehicle, and if there's additional vehicles, we're going to look at the value of those. Now, somebody might have two vehicles. We're going to exclude the one with the highest value. And the second one, maybe they just purchased and they had to, take a full loan out on it. And as we know, as soon as we seem to leave the dealership parking lot, we somehow owe more than our vehicle's worth. So in that situation, there would be no value to that vehicle until it's paid down and there's some equity built up into it. So these are all questions we're going to go through, and you just have to let the interviewer know everything, and we'll look for any other exclusions because we do have other type of exclusions, but generally we're counting the bank account balances, CDs, IRAs, stocks, bonds. We're looking at 401ks of the person filing. We do exclude the 401ks of a parent or a spouse in the household. For the person filing, we're going to look at what value it would have if they have penalties to take it out, things like that. We already talked about the vehicles. Life insurance, that's only going to be if it has a value to it. So if it's only payable when someone passes away, we still want to know about it, but there won't be anything charged as a resource. But if it has dividends, if it has cash surrender value, things like that, we are going to look at that toward the resources. And then property other than where a person lives. So if there's a home and there's land attached to the home, that's all included in the home property. But if there's a lot somewhere else, if there's a vacation home, or if there's a home in a foreign country, those are all things we need to know and look at for resources. An individual has a $2,000 resource limit. A married couple living together has a $3,000 resource limit. If it's parents filing for a child, if there's two parents in the household, they have a $3,000 resource limit. The child has their own $2,000 resource limit. Now, there's a lot of talk about raising these limits because Medicaid has raised theirs. But as of right now, these are our resource limits. So unless there's legislative change in which we would then change our policy, these is what we're looking at for our resources as of the date we're in December of 2024. Another thing we're looking at is living arrangements. Now, this gets especially tricky with people understanding it when we're coming up with a child that's turning 18. Because before 18, if it's just the parent and children of the parents living in the household, we're not worrying about how the bills were paid unless somebody outside the household is paying all of them. But once a child turns 18, they're going to be needing to pay their fair share of bills in order to be due the full SSI check. So if living in even a parent's household after 18, that's considered living in someone else's household, we need the fair share of shelter expenses. Prior to September 30th of this year, we looked at food and shelter. We no longer look at shelter as of September 30th of this year. Or I'm sorry, food as of September 30th this year. We only look at shelter. So that's rent or mortgage, property insurance, property taxes if there is a mortgage, and electricity, gas, water, garbage, and sewer. We don't look at phone. We don't look at cable. We're going to ask, what's the person contributing toward the household as far as these bills? Are they paying their fair share? Another change we just had this year, though, is how we look at in all public assistance household. So a lot of times we no longer have to ask some of these living arrangement questions, because now if there's even one more person in the household who is on the link card, food stamps, or a form of public assistance, it doesn't have to be everyone. If one more person is on that, and we're counting food stamps now, where we didn't used to look at food stamps, also known as a link card, so we no longer have to develop for who's paying what. But in other situations, we still would. Now, in an institution, this would be like a nursing home or another form of Medicaid facility where Medicaid is paying more than 50%. The purpose of the SSI program, because it is coming from general funds, taxpayer funds, is to pay for food and shelter. So if Medicaid is paying for that food and shelter, we're going to back the payment down to $30 a month for just incidentals the person might need. If someone's in a group care or board and care facility, in those situations, the office is usually going to have a precedent to determine what the payment is while in that facility. A spot I really encourage you to check out with questions on SSI is our SSI spotlights. So we have the link here, but if you go to SSA.gov and in the search box, you put SSI spotlights, it'll take you there pretty easily as well. There's a ton of different categories here where if you click into them, it's really going to walk you through the different nuances of each of the categories and explain them in a lot more detail. So this is a very helpful tool to check out. You might notice that we have ABLE accounts on there. Those are a pretty hot topic a lot of times. Trusts are something we get into. SSI benefits for non-citizens. Also, one of our hot topics that people are interested in learning more on, and many, many more. So I encourage you to check out our SSI spotlights when you have time, and look into anything else further that you might want more information on. So when I was talking to you about how we look at bills, and let's just say that someone does not pay anything toward shelter, then they're going to be put in what we call a B living arrangement, and their check is going to be reduced by 1/3. So this year, that value of being in a B living arrangement, that 1/3 reduction, would have the individual being paid $628.67 a month, because we're taking the full benefit rate, which is $943, and we're reducing it by 1/3. So this would be that situation where a person is not paying toward bills. So what commonly happens at age 18 is if the child was not already eligible for SSI benefit, maybe they had to wait for parents, wait till 18 so parents' income and resources was no longer counted, then a lot of times they're going to start in that B living arrangement unless the parent has a very actual bona fide loan agreement that says they have to pay them back. They'll start in a B living arrangement, but if they get awarded benefits and start contributing toward the household expenses, if paying their fair share, then their check would go up to that full rate. So the other type of thing, this is when you are paying toward shelter, and we talked about, is it the fair share of shelter? That's if we're taking all those bills we talked about by the number of people in the household to determine fair share, and anything the claimant contributes is going to be minus fair share minus the contribution, which is the claimant, is the person receiving the SSI benefit, equals the value of the in-kind support and maintenance. So the check would be reduced by this amount if the person's paying toward food and shelter but not paying fair share of shelter. Sorry, I'm still in the habit of saying food because we just had that change. So again, we talked about the bills that we look at, and then we're dividing it by the number of people in the household. And this includes, if it's a 5-month-old baby in the household, they're still part of the household, even if they don't have anything to contribute. We're only concerned with the number of people divided by these expenses to determine fair share. So anyone under 18 is considered a child for SSI. That's pretty straightforward. And other things that happen at 18 always is that we stop looking at parents' income and resources, and we start looking, at those living arrangement changes, and we only look at the person's own income and resources. So that's at age 18. We're also using the adult criteria for a medical decision. But there is a reason we need to know if someone's still regularly attending school. Not only the child who might be receiving benefits, but also other children in the home once they turn 18. We can consider them a child for deeming of other kids for deeming of parents' income up until 22 if regularly attending school. And the reason we would need to know if the person receiving SSI is still regularly attending school is because we have some different income exclusions we apply in those categories. So even though for a lot of things it is 18, no matter what, there's some other reasons that someone could still be considered child for other purposes up until 22 if regularly attending school. Now, earlier we talked about that adult definition. And of course, when we're looking at children under the age of 18, especially very young children, they're not going to be looking at their ability to work. So we have to have different rules that we're using in determining disability for children. So for this, we're looking at, does a child have a physical or mental impairment or combination of both that results in marked or severe limitation in functioning? So they're going to look at functioning relative to the developmental markers in other children their age. The child can either be blind or disabled. If the child's blind, they're actually going to have the same definition of blind as applies to an adult. And then the same thing with adults as far as the condition needing to expected to last at least 12 months, or it's a terminal illness expected to result in death. Now, in addition to the parent's income, of course, we're looking at children's income as well. So for the disabled child that might be, or child with a disability that's filing, living in a household, we're going to look at their own income and resources as well as their parents'. So children might have things like child support or receiving a Social Security benefit off a parent or gifts from family and friends or any, other type of income as well. Child support is counted a little differently than other unearned income. For child support, we look at 2/3 of the amount rather than dollar for dollar with that $20 exclusion. Another thing with children as far as assets, that if you're looking to apply for a child or even, helping a child who's turned 18 apply, one thing you might want to check into is, does anyone else have anything that's in your child's name that you might not be aware of? A lot of things that have come up after the fact on like IRS alerts when I was taking SSI claims would be things like savings bonds that maybe grandma and grandpa had, but they are the child's savings bonds, or other types of accounts that they've put aside that would be considered a resource for that child or adult now. So that's something you just want to make sure of when you're going to do these applications, because we understand if you don't know about them, but it could result in an overpayment later when we interface with the IRS. So it's just something to be thinking about and maybe checking in on if there are people in the child's life who may have done something like that for them. I've mentioned the term deeming several times, and so you're probably got a general idea of what it means, but deeming is both applied, like I said, to spouses in the household or also parents. Deeming applies when it's a child, if the child is under 18 and living at home. It applies to anyone that's a natural, adoptive, or even a step parent in the household. If a parent moves out of the household, we do a redetermination to no longer look at that parent's income and resources. Even if the child is living away for school, but if they come home on some weekends, holidays, school vacations, like this, for instance, a lot of college kids come home at those times, especially the first year or two, they can still be considered in the household for deeming purposes. Like I said, not just the child applying, but also other children in the family, because it's important to know about those other children, because the more ineligible children there are, the higher the income limits are for deeming of the parent's income. So sometimes children will have to wait till 18 to qualify for a medical decision for SSI because of parents' income and resources. In that situation, the application could be made as early as the 18th birthday. But other times there might be children who qualified for SSI prior to age 18. So what happens then at the 18th birthday? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to send it for a new medical decision, because we're going to look at that adult criteria for a disability, of course, but we're also going to do that non-medical update where we no longer look at income and resources of a parent, and we look at the living arrangements in more detail. So those are going to happen when a child is turned 18. Immediately upon turning 18, the system knows to stop counting the parent's information. But there will be an interview scheduled, as soon as possible after 18, of course, adjusting for workloads and offices, to go through the rest of that non-medical information and the living arrangements. Now, generally, like I said, they need to wait till the 18th birthday if there's income and resources that are making a child ineligible based on their parents. Now, there is an exception to this, and this would be children who are in the foster care system. So if there is a youth with a disability in the foster care system, they might be receiving a foster care payment that makes them ineligible for SSI. In that situation, they can actually file 180 days prior to losing that payment so that the medical decision can be on its way to being made before they completely lose income. And this would be as long as they meet all other criteria, non-medical, other than just that foster care payment. So they have under the $2,000 in resources and things like that. Overall, unless waiting for that 18th birthday, we recommend someone applies as soon as they become disabled or as soon as the expectation is that it's a long-term condition. This slide, I didn't get it edited. It says 3 to 5 months. I would say at least 6 to 8 months we're averaging for a medical decision in Illinois. They are getting those disability times down, but there was a large amount of staff lost to not just in Social Security, but to our disability determination service who makes those medical decisions. They lost about half of their staff during COVID. So we're still working on, getting some of those wait times down. But there are situations where we can do a faster application. There's certain conditions that will be flagged. They're called presumptive disabilities. The computer will flag those for us. We don't have to remember the huge list of them. As long as the condition's listed, it'll let us know. It's one of those cases where we could start paying payments right away. And we have other things called compassionate allowances that also flag for a faster decision. So how do you apply for benefits? Well, for adults, anyone over the age of 18 can begin the entire process online. Now, it will begin with an application for Social Security disability. Even if there is no work history, this application for Social Security disability is going to be the gateway to all other aspects of the online application. So maybe you're helping an 18-year-old and they don't have any work history. It's still okay to start with that Social Security disability. They're just going to receive a denial for that one. But when they get into the application, it will say, do you want to file for SSI? You'll mark yes, and then keep going through. Sometimes the SSI is available online. Other times it's not. But as long as you said yes to filing for SSI, it's protecting for the SSI application, and someone from a local office will follow up and take that SSI application after it's received, after submitted online and received. And then the other thing that happens after those applications is the adult disability report will be made available. And I think this is a great benefit when people are able to fill this out online. One of the reasons I say that is I know that sometimes when someone's in a phone interview, they might want to just get that interview done with as soon as possible. And they might not let us know as much information as they would if they're sitting and typing it out at home or someone's helping them type it all out in that adult disability report. So I do think that's an advantage of doing it online. Of course, we know that not everyone can do that online though. So you can always call our toll-free number and make an appointment. The number is 1-800-772-1213. They're open from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. except for federal holidays. So they are open longer hours than the field office phones. Now, under 18, the only part that can be done online is the child disability report. But again, if you're able to fill that out online, That really helps, I think, have more detailed information that might happen over a phone interview, but if not, that's okay too. Again, you're going to call and set up that appointment with phone appointment with our toll-free number. So once we've got that interview or the online application done, the person at Social Security at the local office is going to review the non-medical factors. And maybe the person does have enough work. So we're going to send the Social Security disability for a medical decision. Maybe they qualify under SSI with the income and resources. Maybe they qualify for both, in which case we'll send both for the medical decision. But we're going to transfer it to a disability termination service. And that it gets assigned somebody who we call it an adjudicator that's making the medical decision. They're going to collect records from medical providers. And because we're going to have an authorization that gives us permission to get those medical records. This happens electronically. So oftentimes that goes very quickly for them. They also might send out more paperwork about daily activities, or we usually ask if it can list a contact outside the doctors and hospitals. They might send that contact form about what they observe of daily activities, and they'll gather all that information to make the decision. Now, I touched on presumptive disability earlier, where I said that's one of the times that you might have a faster decision. The other thing about presumptive disability is it allows us to actually make payments for up to 6 months while waiting on that disability decision. And then if the disability, the applications end up being denied, then you do not have to pay those payments back. If it's approved, then the payments will just continue under the regular payment provisions. So we kind of talked about this already as far as what that state agency is doing, getting medical evidence. They might also ask you to go to a Social Security doctor or take your child to a Social Security doctor. These are doctors that are contracted by Social Security. So they're going to be paid for their service. They're doctors within a community. This especially might happen if maybe there's a condition that there's not well documented with. Maybe there's not, been a lot of doctor's visits. It could be a specialist of some kind to explore more about condition. It could be a psychiatrist. And it's really important to keep the appointment for those interviews if one is scheduled. Once all that is said and done, the Disability Termination Service will make the decision. And if it's awarded, almost always with SSI, we have to call and do an updated interview before we can make a payment. So that will be going back through that non-medical information, income and resources, living arrangements, making sure we have proof of any income. If there's a representative payee application needed, we'll need to go through that before starting a check. Social Security disability, if there's no work involved since the application and there's no need for a payee, that can go right into pay. But for SSI, it generally always needs an updated interview. So we would go through that. Whoever has the case at the local office will go through that before receiving an award letter. But if the application is denied medically, the denial letter will come directly from the Disability Termination Service for that. And importantly, it will tell you how to appeal the determination. Really important to file an appeal, because that will make sure that you're protecting yourself for any back pay, because SSI doesn't pay back before an application date. But if you file an appeal and it takes several more months and you get awarded, we're going to pay back to the eligibility month, the month after that. The eligibility month is whatever month you either set up the appointment or did the online application. So it's always good to keep that continual payment potential. Whereas if you don't file an appeal and then you file again 5-6 months down the road, you're restarting the clock for any potential payment. So this is where they're talking about that appeal, where you do have 60 days to file the appeal. Now, the easiest way, again, to get that appeal filed is online, but if you're not able to file it online, you can request the appeal paperwork from the local office. There's two different types of health care that are looked at with our disability programs. Medicare is the federal health insurance. It's for anyone over the age of 65 or anyone on Social Security disability for 24 consecutive months. So this has to have that earnings history to it. It could be your own earnings history, or again, if you're a disabled adult child on a parent's record, you will have the Medicare after 24 months. Then Medicaid, this would be maybe somebody's still in that 24-month waiting period. So they might be on Medicaid waiting for their Medicare to start, or children or adults otherwise who are on SSI that meet the limited income and resources of the Medicaid program. Now, in the state of Illinois, we are not a Medicaid automatic state. I also help with Wisconsin. They're a Medicaid automatic state, so that works very nicely for them, where it goes into pay on SSI and they get their Medicaid. In Illinois, you do need to file a separate application with the Department of Human Services, but almost always, any case I've seen that get awarded SSI, they're going to get awarded Medicaid unless Medicaid finds out about some income or resources that we didn't know about. I did say if sometimes we need that representative payee application before we can put a benefit into pay. So anyone under the age of 18, with a few exceptions, is going to have a representative payee. When someone's getting close to 18, if there's a lot of back and forth, maybe between parents or guardians, things like that, we sometimes pay them directly, but that's not very common. Generally, someone's going to have a payee until they're 18, but some adults also have a representative payee, and that's because they've been determined not capable of managing their own funds. So a representative payee is a big responsibility. It's generally going to be a relative or friend. Sometimes it's an institution. Let's say if a person's in a nursing home and the family doesn't want to take care of the benefit, it might be the nursing home. But we're always going to investigate anyone who applies to be payee. So we're not going to be making someone a payee just because they asked to be. We're going to investigate it. If the person is over 18, unless they have a legal guardian, they're going to be given advance notice of anyone becoming their representative payee. And we're going to kind of talk to them about who's becoming their payee as well. The payee is responsible for how all the money is spent. So we're going to do that interview to determine relationship, qualifications, make sure there's nothing that kind of bars the person from maybe being able to manage money that's applying to be payee, the responsibilities and duties of being a payee, especially reporting responsibilities, and explaining liability for not reporting changes. If a record is an overpayment, not just the beneficiary receiving the payment, but the representative payee could be made liable for that overpayment if it was, not being reported timely, things resulted in overpayment. As far as how to, spend money if you're a representative payee, it's going to be very much how you would spend your own money as far as food, clothing, medical care, shelter first, and then any personal comfort items and reasonably foreseeable needs. Now, the only thing about saving money for reasonably foreseeable needs is making sure that if they're on SSI, that they're under that $2,000 resource limit. But it is going to be the payee's responsibility to make sure that those needs are met. If the person has a payee, that's the payee's responsibility. Also, reporting all the changes are the payee's responsibility. So we have a lot of more information on our website about the representative payee program as well. You can go to the link SSA.gov/payee. There is a guide for representative payees. It's really nice to have as well in our publication section. So under SSI, I really like to say you pretty much have to report everything to us. So Social Security, you're pretty much reporting if you work, address change, bank account change, most basic things. But SSI, we're going to ask you to report all sorts of changes, not just if you move, if anyone moves in or out of your household, if marital status changes, if anyone in the household passes away, if you're in and out of a nursing home, if you leave the United States for time, all sorts of things. So if you're a person who has a lot of these changes, you're going to become very familiar with whoever handles the case at the local Social Security office. When I did SSI, I did it for 12 years. I had my regular callers, and then I had people that would come up on a redetermination list, and I had never talked to them just because they had never moved, never had income, and just kind of stayed in the same place. But someone else who has a lot of changes, you get to be very familiar with them. So it's very important. All these things are reported. They are listed on the representative payee application. They're listed on the reporting responsibilities at the end of our other applications we sent out. And anytime we do a redetermination, they are listed again. So we do want you to make sure you're looking through all of those when you're receiving from this program. Now, there are a lot of work incentives through Social Security to try to make it so that people are able, if they're able to try working without fear of immediately losing their benefits. So we have different work incentives that allow for trials of employment. We have incentives that can help with education, rehabilitation, and training to be able to work. It's just important that if someone goes to work, that either the person or their representative payee reports that right away. We need to know when it starts and when it stops. Hours worked, rate of pay, employer, and if we can get the employer ID number, if you can ask your employer for that, we can then put that in the system, and you can subsequently report any future pay stubs through a My Social Security account. Even as a representative payee, there'll be a rep payee portal that you can report income through that portal for the person in your own My Social Security account. Talked about this a little bit already as far as the earned exclusion for SSI, $65, and then we count half. If you haven't used the $20 general income exclusion on unearned income, we're going to apply that first and then the $65 and half. But if you are a student, then you can make more, and that's where I was talking about really needing to know when you're regularly attending school between 18 and 22, not just the child themselves, but like I said, other children in the household of the parents as well. So you can see you can make quite a bit more, $2,290 this year a month, up to $9,230 a year would be excluded under the student earned income exclusion, but we need to know to place that in the system so it properly excludes the income. What does regularly attending school mean? College or university for at least 8 hours a week, grades 7 through 12 for at least 12 hours a week, or a training course preparing for employment. So if somebody is in a life skills only course where they're not being trained for employment, that does not fall under our definition of regularly attending school. After grade 12, it does need to have some sort of preparation for employment involved in it with it. So at least 12 hours a week, 15 hours a week of shop class or less if a student's conditions or an illness is preventing them from attending that amount of time. Homeschooling, as long as it's in grades 7 through 12 and 12 hours a week, can also be accounted for that student earned income exclusion. ABLE accounts, as I mentioned, we do have a spotlight on this, and I think the ABLE accounts are a really great addition to things because special needs trusts also work, but they're a lot more specific as far as the rules on those and those being excluded and the wording of them. You want to make sure you always have an experienced person setting up that special needs trust. ABLE accounts, of course, you still want somebody that's trained in how to set them up, but there is a lot less rules involving who can put the money in the ABLE accounts and so forth. So ABLE accounts can be used for education, housing, transportation, health, employment, training, technology, funeral, basic living cost. Anyone can contribute to the account, including the person. So the eligible individual can contribute their own money into that account. Up to $18,000 per year, and $100,000 is excluded as a resource. So way over that $2,000 resource limit. So Again, we talked about some of the things that ABLE accounts can be used on, and we do have that spotlight. Another work incentive that I wanted to mention tonight is if you have earnings that make you too high for SSI cash payments, but you still need Medicaid. So not all jobs that are paying an amount to put you out of SSI might not have the best health insurance. So this is a provision that allows the SSI status to continue without terminating the record. Normally, after 12 months of non-payment, the SSI record terminates. But if it's one of these, what we call Section 1619B cases, the record will not terminate, and it'll continue to allow for Medicaid eligibility. And so this is another incentive where the person has continued Medicaid even while working and over the limit. Now, the part about that, though, I do want to mention real quick, is that you still need to be under the $2,000 resource limit. You still have to meet all those other non-medical criteria of SSI, except for the work income. So that's important to keep up. If you want the 1619B status, you do have to keep up with us as far as doing non-medical redeterminations and things so that you can keep this status. Wage reporting, we talked about the My Social Security option. You can also, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't recommend calling a field office to report. It's going to be, hard to use your time on a monthly basis doing that. But you can call. Otherwise, you can mail or fax the information as well, or you can call the teleservice number. If it's SSI, we also have a mobile wage reporting app that's allowed to report wages, and a telephone wage reporting service. So the telephone wage reporting service would be better probably for you and easier than calling in a field office every month to report your income. And then we do have additional resources you might be interested in checking out about working. Our Working While Disabled publication is wonderful. It has all our work incentives kind of laid out in a very nice concise way. And so I recommend checking that out. We also have our SSA.gov work site with information on our Ticket to Work program, where that helps with employment networks and job opportunities, things like that. Here is what our SSA.gov homepage looks like. So when you're going to our website, make sure you see this. Make sure you have that little flag at the top. Make sure this is what you're looking at. There are, some other websites that are actually attorney sites. So if you Google Social Security, you got to be really careful because you want to make sure you're at SSA.gov and not someone else trying to get you into their site, as far as that they're not the actual government site. Always .gov, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Social Security, IRS, Federal Trade Commission, always .gov. And you can see our homepage is laid out pretty easy to prepare or apply for benefits. And then down here under the managed benefits, that's our My Social Security accounts. We recommend everyone over the age of 18 has created a My Social Security account. So a lot of great reasons to do this. Now, we did in the last few years transition over how you log into a My Social Security account. If you had a username and password, you're going to be asked to upgrade that to a login.gov account, but you can still have that username and password as of now. Otherwise, if you need to create an account, it's going to take you through login.gov, or if you have an existing login.gov or ID.me account, you can sign in with those. If not, like I said, it's going to take you through login.gov to create the account and then bring you back to finish. Now, I mentioned that you could mail or fax in income to your local Social Security office. If you need to know where that is, you can use our field office locator. You put the zip code in, it is going to give you the field office address, fax number, which the fax number is really nice because it's not like it spits out the paper on the other end anymore. It's goes into what we call a work track system, where the manager can profile it and assign it electronically to the employee that needs to work it. So that allows us to kind of keep track of that better. There's also drop boxes at most offices where you can drop things off if we don't need to, hand it right back to you. You can do that. A lot of options so that you don't have to make an appointment to actually go into the office. And the reason I said make an appointment, I just want to kind of bring up is that we are transitioning to an appointment focused model. So we're starting to just let people know about that now and kind of encourage the appointments. And starting January 5th, I believe is the date, the offices are going to be switching over to, even if you're just going in the office to get a social security card or a benefit letter, you're going to be asked to have an appointment. Now, if you're able to create the My Social Security account, a lot of the things that you might need from a local office, you could do online. So if you have a driver's license or state ID, a valid ID, and you're just getting a replacement social security card, you can do that online. Request a new Medicare card. If you're on Social Security, you can change your address, phone number, direct deposit. For SSI, we need to be contacted, but you can do that over the phone for those living arrangement and address updates. But most of the time, start with our SSA.gov site if you're able to use online services. That's the first thing to try. Next would be doing the business over the phone. And third would be setting up an appointment to go into the local office if it's something that can't be taken care of online or by the phone. And I am available for any questions.
Thank you so much, Megan.